Awesome. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ariana Marcasikim, and I'm a board member with IGDA Seattle. My day job is as an HR and recruiting manager at Play Everywhere. Play Everywhere is a console port and co-development studio in Seattle, Washington, and I'm extremely pleased and excited to introduce our guest today, Royal O'Brien. He's the general manager of digital media and games at the O3DE engine, which is part of the Linux Foundation. So we're going to talk a little bit about the engine, how the first year of their release has been, and how game developers can make the best use of it. Just some housekeeping. This is going to be a conversation. We've also got some slides to show us all. So any questions that you might have, you can type into the chat throughout our talk, and then we'll address them as we get them. Before we dive in, Royal, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and your experience in the games industry across the last few decades.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Gosh, games. It's one of those things where they say if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. So I decided games was what I was going to do. And that probably stems out from all of the hours and hours that I spent playing games as a kid. So it's just something I wanted to always do. So my experience in the background. So I am by trade an engineer. I've been a software developer for over 35 years. I develop in all kinds of fun languages. I've got neat patents and all that stuff. I've been building technologies forever. And a lot of it's been in building things either into game engines or middleware for game engines or different kind of applications and things like that. So that's a lot of my background has been, but I've also throughout the years always been kind of self-employed. So I basically created and exited from 4 companies and then thought, well, let me see what it's like to get a job. So I wound up working over at Amazon. So really cool, really interesting. A lot of people that know me in the games industry are like, I don't know how you're going to make it there, because you're usually kind of your own boss, your own thing, running your own company. And come to find out, that place was very much like a small business. It was like a startup. That's the funny thing. So I had a lot of fun and actually thrived in there. Just nothing but great stuff to say about it. And it was just people who are driven. And that's what I liked. So, but when I was over there, I worked a lot with in the lumberyard team, with 3D engines and games and kind of spread out. Interestingly enough, I worked with, at one point in time, as a single-threaded owner for marketing for pretty much everything with games in the trade events. So like, we do GDC. And so I was responsible for getting all of the materials that were going to be presented for, ADA or Game Tech, but also for AWS ads, Twitch, Alexa, Amazon.com, like all of it across the board, which is fun. And I've actually co-hosted TwitchCon in 2018. So if you find that video, you can laugh and you can see me for like 8 hours, with some others just co-hosting that. It was pretty trippy, but it was a lot of fun. So always been in the games industry, been written tons of mods, done, different things. You probably, if you look under my gaming tag, Obi-Wando, you'll find like all these like Quake mods and fun stuff like that. So, it's a lot of fun. And so when I got done with Amazon, I basically helped take the lumberyard engine and move it over into open source. And as a result, really wanted to make sure that it stayed neutral. And so I moved over to the Linux Foundation, and they didn't have anybody there to represent games or kind of that media. And so they said, well, we really need somebody who can handle this vertical because it's growing. And we think open source is going to have a big impact there. So that's what happened. Is I moved over as the general manager of digital media and games. And then I also am the executive director of the O3DE Foundation, which hosts the O3DE engine. So that's a lot of the stuff that I do. And then, of course, I also play on the metaverse side as well, because that ties into the whole digital media strategy and interactive. So a lot of fun. And then I guess the only other thing I would say is that before I got into all this, I had fun as a Marine back in the Marine Corps a long time ago. So that's kind of how I got my head screwed on straight. Let's just put it that way, going from being a strange kid to a strange adult.
I don't know about that, but certainly that wealth of experience, I'm sure, brings so much to the way you think about leadership and the vision of the engine and, guiding the foundation as well. for those who may not be as familiar, what does the Linux Foundation do, and why is it such an important part of the tech industry and games in general?
So the Linux Foundation actually has a really important role. A lot of you have used technologies that are with cloud services that you see like Microsoft and Google and AWS, and you'll come to find out that a lot of these technologies, they come from open source. These are projects that are created and shared. I'm sure you've heard of Docker and Kubernetes and things like that. And open source is a way for people to be able to collaborate across the board, where they can share and work together and not kind of be in a conflicted state. And so that's what it kind of plays like Switzerland in that model, where it can help build communities, allow companies to work together to really do something magnificent. And the other thing that it does is it helps level the playing field so that the software can be licensed and used by anybody, and they can build an amazing business or build something that otherwise they might not have been able to do 15, 20 years ago, to enter the industry. So you'll find it all over the place. All these open libraries that you'll find, OpenSSL, and they may not be tied to the Linux Foundation, but they are tied to open source. And the Linux Foundation is all about really driving open source and openness and sharing and building things. The big benefits that companies and individuals get is that if you were a company and you had to maintain an entire engine, in other words, for those of you that maybe try to build or roll your own, when you have to load like a Targa or a JPEG or something as a texture, you don't actually write the entire JPEG loading library, do you? And all the math and everything goes behind it. You probably just use live JPEG, or live PNG. And so that's what open source allows you to do. It allows everybody to contribute, get the table stakes out on the ground so people can start writing the more innovative things. And it gets maintained by the community. If there was a bug in that JPEG library, it's not like every single developer has to update that library. The maintainers of that library in open source update it. And so by people contributing because they use these things, it goes back to the community. That's how we grow a lot faster, and you don't have 200-man team working on a project that are trying to do that. So it reduces cost, it reduces effort, and it allows people focused in different areas to do some pretty amazing things so that you can build amazing things.
That totally makes sense. And I'm really interested to hear as much as you can tell us about the transition from the engine when it was internal at Amazon to the engine that is today. But I'm wondering if you wanted to share your slides first, because I know you've got some awesome stuff prepared for us. Okay, yeah, that'd be good.
But I will answer your question.
Then awesome.
So the interesting thing is, we were working with it. There wasn't as much adoption, because what they wanted to do was have this engine that allowed people to use it, but they had to use AWS services. And so there wasn't as much adoption and uptake, and it was kind of hard to maintain. It was a fork off the Crytek engine. And so when we looked at that, we kind of determined, well, we got to be able to do something with it. We spent a lot of time and money, building this up. And so part of it a long time ago was first re-architecting it. How can we architect this in a manner that makes it modular, so that just because I touch the physics library, I don't have to touch 15 different areas of it. I'd like to be able to stay inside of my areas. So part of it was the re-architecture, and I worked with the team on that as well. And then getting it to where we could actually open source it. So working with Linux Foundation, building up the charters, building up the special interest groups, how will it be released? And then making sure all the licensing was clear, that we know how we're doing it, which is under Apache 2 and MIT, and then getting it out the door. And when we got it out the door, it was realistically rewritten from the ground up. So some people think it's like an old Crytek fork, but if you dive in the code, you'll find out that there is, last time I checked, about 0.5% of the code is actually Crytek. So you're talking about 99.5% of it has been rewritten from the ground up with new techniques, new models. And these are by people that have been writing games for 15, 20 plus years in all the studios that we've all played, who are the architects and designers and writers in this. So it's definitely a new engine. It's definitely got, work to do. It's not this perfection thing, but it has all the bones of what somebody needs to do to be able to build a game, or to build something they want to build, or not have to tear down. Because a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to go pick up a AAA engine and just build a game and it's going to magically work. Let me give you a hint. Most people that are building a big game, they have to tear apart 40, 50% of the engine and then rebuild it back up because it has a lot of subsystems that have nothing to do with the gameplay that they're trying to build. So by having this kind of an engine with, full source that's completely modular, they can spend less time actually tearing it apart and more time building up what they're trying to build. So hopefully that answers your question.
Definitely. And that definitely sounds good because I know there's so many custom tools that go into so many big studios and make it really unwieldy to work on a very polished game without a huge team. So it's great to hear that this engine can help enable that for more developers.
Yeah, and having a community behind it that can actually drive a lot of it's important. For me to share though, you have to let me share. You have it disabled.
Oh, I have to let you share.
Yeah, one of those things. I'd like to share, and I'm not in a hacking mood, so let's save that for another day.
I wonder if it's the settings of this meeting.
Let's see, share. Nope, host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, well, that's boo to that.
Well, while you're figuring that out, the cool thing about open source is that you'll find out that a lot of tools and interoperability come from anywhere and nowhere. I mean, let's give you an idea. In the original roadmap, when we released, open source to O3DE, Linux wasn't really intended, full Linux support wasn't intended until probably December of last year, and it launched in July. The community otherwise had other plans because 3 weeks later they had full Debian support running in Linux where you didn't need a Windows machine at all. So it's one of those things that when it comes to open source community and people, like the talent comes out of the woodwork and all of a sudden it's just these magical things start appearing out of nowhere. And it's amazing because that's where you get some of the best tools and some of the best, we've had people that have written bridges so that you can be in Blender doing everything you do, update your models, and it automatically updates in O3D. And you can update textures and all the things. Like having that kind of fluidity between them starts to make it easier for their pipelines. And it's having a good architecture that can allow you to do that is, kind of a key piece. So the other part is that you have a lot of industries that are working in open source. If you look at how much open source comes from films and studios, you would be amazed at what they actually put out. So, between film and studio doing their open source tools, you've got, some things that are done in automotive or some different vertical industries, robotics, you'll see a lot of stuff like that, simulation, AI, those kind of tools, when you can get them to talk to other ones that were completely unrelated, that changes the rules entirely. You know what I mean? So
I do have a follow-up for that. It looks like they're telling me behind the scenes that we won't be able to see the slides. But maybe you can share them. We could do like a show notes or a link or something if you have those posted. But I do have a follow-up to that question. So in my online stalking and researching to be able to talk to you tonight, I'd listened to another interview that you'd done talking about how this engine can interact with Unity and Unreal. And I'm wondering if you could, maybe expand on that a little bit.
So if you take into account that everything is completely modular, the example I always give people is that if you've used Unity and Unreal, imagine trying to disable the renderer. Try to remove the renderer out of the code. It's going to be a feat of strength, is what it will be, because it's intertwined with a lot of the systems and it's integral to it. I mean, you probably have an easier chance of doing it on Unreal because they have a lot more of the source it's open, versus Unity where, it's a little more difficult. You don't have that unless you're paying for the enterprise, that specialized license. But the idea here is that because it's modular, let's put it this way, to disable the renderer in O3D, just turn the library off. Turn the Atom rendering library off and poof, there's no renderer. I'm working with Intel and they have a open source ray tracer, like a true ray tracer that produces the most amazing images. And it's a software ray tracer that is open source. And so what we've done is we've taken that and we actually made that into a renderer. So you can literally be using your GPU renderer, which does a pretty good job in ray tracing, and then turn on the Intel ray tracer and actually get, let's say, a 16K by 16K true ray traced image out of it. So like if you had a beautiful scene shot, you're looking at it in your the renderer that's done on the GPU, you can get one that's ridiculous and it's going to be the same color space, exactly the same. It's just going to be using a full-blown, soft retracer. So that gives you an example. And then we're talking about Unreal and Unity. The example here is that we have a network stack, and because each one of these things are modules, you could take the network code and the network stack out of O3DE as a library, bolt some of the APIs together, and connect it into Unity or Unreal if you wanted to. And the result is that you've got a network library that you could turn around and use in any of those. See, you wouldn't normally do that if you were using Unity. You wouldn't take those libraries and try to bolt them into Unreal because they're both licensed products. But in open source, it's different. It's Apache. You can fork it, take it, do whatever you want with it. And if you want to contribute back, you can. And if you don't have to. But some people might ask, well, why would you want people to do that? And the reason is because when people, let's just say somebody's working on a Unity project or an Unreal project, and they've got the network stack and they want to use this, and they're working with it, it works in their game, and they find some bugs. If the bugs that they find are in the generic stack, they can contribute those back if it has nothing to do with their intellectual property. That means that the community wins because they get contributions, even though it's not the full-blown engine, it's still the network stack. And so open source is about how you get the contributions in, how everybody else can inure the benefit of it. And that modularity, this is not about open source being the only place where open source plays. The way it's been put together is it's a balanced ecosystem of open source and commercial, where they can work together seamlessly. Because if you think that the only way it'll get done is with pure open source, it's not very realistic. There are some amazing commercial tools, and they're really good. It's a matter of how you get them to work with open source.
That totally makes sense. And I'm sure at this point, there might be some people wondering exactly how the licensing works. So is there anything that developers should know when they're deciding to use this engine for their game?
Yeah. So the licensing is Apache 2 and MIT. So that basically gives you the ability to fork it, do whatever you want with it. Patents are covered. Licensing, the software licensing is covered. So there are no real repercussions from it as long as you follow the Apache 2. So it's not restrictive. It is considered to be one of the most permissive licenses out there. The difference between Apache and MIT, just so you're aware, is that you'll see some projects are MIT and some projects are Apache. But there is a difference between the two. And that is that MIT covers you, as free software, and you can share it and use it. Not a big deal. However, if the software has a basis where there's a patent tied to it, you're in trouble because MIT doesn't cover patents explicitly. Apache 2, however, does have specific clauses in there for patents along with the software. So be aware that Apache 2 is really a key element here, being able to do that. And then the other part is when you're talking about media, using Creative Commons. Creative Commons where you have unrestricted or CC BY NC, which is non-commercial, which you can use it, but you can't commercialize it. So all of those are in the actual code base when you go into it in GitHub. So you go to github.com/O3DE, and the repo is O3DE, and you can look in there. You can see the licensing on each one of them. You can look at, there are SPDX tags that are in there that actually audit every single piece that's used. So it makes sure that it's all above board. And the interesting thing is I get that question a lot from different dev studios. They're like, we're not sure if we work with open source that somebody's not going to come and sue us. There's actually a session. So I have somebody from the Linux Foundation. We have an event coming up next month called O3DE Con. And it's in Austin, Texas, 17th to the 19th. But we have one session in there that's specific to this conversation, which is open source licensing and studios. And so we have somebody from the Linux Foundation who's going to actually talk about and answer questions about what am I looking at if I use open source software in building a game or building an experience. And the main reason of why I had them put that in there is because I've actually had studios say, I'm not sure I want to use open source because I'm afraid it might be an issue.
Right. That totally makes sense. I think it's hard to make a game and it's hard to make money from a game. So just making sure that that's all buttoned up and having that information out there for people, I'm sure is a big help. Yeah. And I know our area, we were talking a little bit earlier, we've got a couple of gaming schools around here. So people are always looking to get into the industry. I have a couple of questions around that. Okay. But the first one is, with so many compelling tools out there right now, who should really be using this engine and for what type of games, and who could really best take advantage of this technology?
Really, so anybody who is looking to kind of, if you're trying to learn, for one, if you're trying to learn how to get into 3D engines, really what the background behind it is, it's a great opportunity for you to do it, especially if you're a student. Here's the thing, as a student, you go to school, you work on projects, but they don't really convey expertise. And so the problem is that you'll go to get a job and it's like, oh, cool, you can be a QA tester. Even if you spent the last 2 years writing entire renderers or implementations, it doesn't matter because you don't really have that experience that can be seen. But working in an open source project is very different, because if you decide that you really want to rewrite parts of a renderer, you can do it in an open source project, contribute the code back into the community. When then you have maintainers that are 15, 20-year engineers, and they're looking at it and they'll be able to PR check it. If it looks good, they'll merge it. Every time they merge that code on your PR, that becomes part of your resume. Literally, when you have an employer who wants to hire you, you could point to all of the different contributions that you've done over the years, and you literally are putting a stake in the ground of saying, I have this many years experience working in 3D engines. And it's important because when we're talking about C++ and 3D engines, now you're talking about Frostbite, Snowdrop, all the different engines from EA, BioWare, Ubisoft, and their C++ engines. It's not like you can't go to school for Frostbite programming, okay?
Right.
It's a proprietary engine that's internal. But if you have C++ experience working with the 3D engine and you can show code contributions that you've done, somebody can evaluate and determine, should you be a QA tester, or should we really be looking at you as somebody seriously? So it allows students to kind of shortcut that. We've had over 20 people get snapped up from our community that are in Discord, which is funny. So discord.gg/O3DE, that's where the community is. And you'll find all the engineers that you normally can't get access to in all these big companies. They're right there. You literally can ask them questions. But as you contribute to these, we've seen these contributors that are either independents or working at other companies. And so they start putting into the code. And all of a sudden I watch like a month or two later and their name tag changes and they have a new company name behind them. And I'm like, what in the world? So like we see this happen all the time. And the other part of it is being able to find mentors in a community that can help you actually get to your destination of what you're trying to do. It's going to be hard work, okay? It's not going to be easy. There's no quick path here, but you do have people that have done this, that know how to do it. I talk with all the different game studios at a lot of different levels. They're feeling the same pain. They can't hire people fast enough. So if you're a student that you want to get in, this is one of the easier paths for you to get there without having to waste 2, 3, 4 years of your life to prove your mettle when you can actually show what you're capable of out of the gate. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things, and they're looking for them. And when they find them, they grab them very quickly.
Absolutely. As a recruiter, I can definitely speak to the speed of the hiring process. We're always trying to find people quickly, and jobs, any job that comes up, we're trying to fill ASAP. But I really liked your point about almost having like a proof of work rather than asking someone to do a test or giving a take-home assignment. Nobody really wants to do those. I could also say, speaking as a recruiter. So this sounds like a really good way to be able to show work, get practice, and have, a showpiece that you can have on your portfolio or on your resume. And that sounds like a really cool tool.
It makes a difference, because I've had companies, that have literally, I'll write different pieces of software and I'll be able to talk about the architecture and what I built, everything behind it. And I'm just talking to the engineers and we're kind of having fun with it. Like I did a streaming system. And the funny thing is that I had a handful of studios like, yeah, come down. We'd love to have you and talk to you and all that. And I go in and I start talking to them and they're like, yeah, meet our CTO, meet our studio head, meet this, but that. And then like a few hours into it, you're like, oh, this is pretty cool. And they're like, so what do you think about this company? I'm like, this is pretty cool. You guys got here. Like, well, would you like to work here? I'm like, wait a minute. Did I just do an interview loop and not know it? Like, I didn't pick up on it at first. Like, they had my LinkedIn on the desk. The CTO had my LinkedIn printed out on his desk. I'm like, why does he have that? And so you'll find out that your work experience and things that you've done, they if somebody sees something they want, they will grab you. And that gives you the ability to be in the driver's seat.
Absolutely. And I know, again, as a recruiter, we're always looking for different places to source from. So I'll definitely be taking a peek in that Discord later on.
We've had Ubisoft and a couple other companies that don't use this engine drop jobs into our Discord because they know they can find C++ developers with 3D game engine experience, and that's what they need for their engine.
Yeah, everybody wants an Unreal developer right now, so this sounds like a really good stepping stone.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, that's C++ experience in a 3D engine. The only difference is that in this one here, you get to be a lot closer, a lot dirtier with it. And if there's something, the difference is that when you go to make a contribution, with Unreal, you're going to have, their maintainers are going to have to accept it into the cycle. In an open source project, our velocity is roughly about 18 to 24 hours for a PR merge, because we have about, I don't know, maybe 150 people constantly running it, about 60 maintainers in there that turn it around really fast, and about 300 engineers. To give an example of the velocity, from about 3-month gap of when our last release came out, there were 320 people working on it, 320 contributing engineers, over 6 million lines changed, and over 1,500 PRs done.
Wow.
Okay. We're already, we haven't even come into so the next release is in October, and, at O3DE Con, and we're already north of 1,600 PRs in this. That's how fast and how high the velocity is. But we have companies, we have, Oppo, Huawei, AWS, Intel, Microsoft. We had all these companies that are contributing, Cesium, Hadean, they're contributing into the code as well. And that's why we have that kind of velocity. So again, it's a way that you can put your work in and actually have it seen by contributing. Right.
And I'm curious what it's like being an organizer of so many huge names. So what is that like day to day? How do you wrangle everybody and, get them all pointed in the same direction?
Wrangle is the right word. It is. Well, so actually the way that it works is when we put this together, we put it together in special interest groups. And so when you look in Discord or when you look in the charter, you'll find out there are SIGs for each disciplinary area. Game engines are like operating systems. They're very complex. There's a lot of moving parts. So we have one that's tied to rendering, one for sound, one for network, one for build systems, one for core systems. And so each one of those independently determine what are the features that they want to release in the next cycle. And so the companies, like we have a new one coming up that we're going to be doing soon, which is for mobile. So we have 2 of the largest mobile manufacturers on the planet, along with some of the vendors that produce the ray tracing, and they're looking to standardize some of the graphic APIs of mobile devices in the industry and use this as an implementation model. And so they'll have a special interest group, SIG Mobile, that'll be focused on 3D graphics on this, and they've done it already. So they did an example where they had ray tracing on low to mid-end hardware, and they actually showed it running on this open source engine. And so, think about it, ray tracing on your phone.
Right? Yeah, that's crazy.
Seems crazy, but the fact that they got it done, earlier this year, and that they keep working on it, kind of gives you that testament that open source can move way faster than anything else. So the way that you do that is you give them the autonomy to be able to operate inside of each one of their special interest areas. And then you have a steering committee above that, and the steering committee helps kind of bring that all together with some of the cross-cutting issues where they meet on a continual basis. And it actually flows really well. We have a full calendar that shows when the meetings are. Anybody can jump in the meetings. The thing about doing this all in the open is that all of the meetings and things you think that normally happen in companies behind closed doors, none of them happen here. You literally can drop into Discord there's a calendar that you can find that we run through Groups.io, and you can drop in on any of the meetings and become a part of it uninvited. You can literally just be in there and go at it. So it's one of those things that, you can see a link to it and you'll see that there's just a calendar with all of them. And if there's areas that you want to be a part of, go into it. Go to Discord. There it is. Everybody will show up, and you'll hear what's happening and become a part of it. You don't have to be a programmer. You can be into art. You can be a technical artist. You can be a PM. I've had a handful of people actually join this project because they wanted to know how to do project management of an open source project. There's, where do you get that kind of experience where you have the larger magnitude? And so we've had a few people join as PMs to gain that experience for their resume.
Wow.
Think about that.
It sounds like the door is wide open to a lot of different disciplines, and everyone is welcome. That sounds really cool.
People
you're right.
want to make an impact.
Yeah. Where else would you where could you get hands-on experience being a PM? Yeah, that sounds awesome.
And that's a key, because you're not just working. The big thing about like the O3DE engine and the foundation is that it's run in kind of a commercial professional way. The only difference between, say, this and a small business is that small business is for profit. The purpose of this is open and sharing. You see what I mean? So, but it's still run the same way. We have partners that contribute. We have marketing. We have events. We're constantly promoting. We're putting money into diversity. We're putting it into scholarships. We're trying to grow and promote this as much as possible so that people can use it. Like, if you use it, we don't make any more money. And if you don't use it, we don't make any more. Like, it is all about, sharing and growth. And that's how it is. And it's driven by the partners who also believe in this, of what they're doing. And it comes back to that main part of it, which is in open source, you can reduce your costs and increase your velocity of using an open source project in your business. So you can see, for them, it's smart business, but everybody in the community that uses it also inures the benefit as a result. And so these roles, these PM roles that you might need years of experience, well, you can actually show how you were able to move the life cycle of a project like this in, how you were able to get the renderer to go through a release cycle and manage all the tickets. This isn't like we have 2 or 3 tickets. I think we have something like 2,000 some odd tickets, and it's constantly flowing. If you go to GitHub, O3DE, and you take a look and you go to the O3DE repo and you go to issues, you can see there are 2,514 open tickets with 2,301 closed.
Wow.
So it's definitely a way to get into an enterprise environment and get that experience. And I think a lot of people don't realize that this opportunity is there for them.
I mean, I definitely didn't. So I'm really, really glad that you're telling us about it. I think we did have a question, and yeah. I'll just bust right in with it. Could you talk a little bit more about the diversity initiatives that you mentioned?
Absolutely. So, with some of so we have diversity luncheons. We have a diversity community as well that actually helps make some of the decisions. You'll see actually in the Discord, we have a specific area put together for that. So we have a marketing committee, diversity and inclusion committee. And so the idea is that whenever anything is done for UI, UX, or terminology of things that are facing or exposed, you'll find out that a lot of times it's just kind of talk, and it still kind of goes through. Yeah. So we have the maintainers that when the code goes in to do some of these changes, like when you're changing terminology or changing it forward facing, that there's also a diversity maintainer that we put in there. And so the code might be flawless and it passes all the maintainers, but if the diversity maintainer sees a problem, they can actually stop the merge right there and say, hey, you didn't use something that was more diverse in this environment. So instead of us just saying, hey, we have these diversity programs that are hand wavy, we're actually implementing it as part of the process. We have a no tolerance to any of the diversity issues that exist in a community, and we're very fast to shut them down in Discord. So you'll find out that open source projects are not really kind per se to diverse environments, and for me, it disturbs me because it's like we're missing 50% of the brain power on the planet. To me, I look at it so I like to play a lot of games like MMOs and things like that. And a lot of them, I ran some top 10 world guilds, and everybody was a player. It didn't matter what your background was. It was all about your performance and your work. And So when I look at it in the community, it's like you have somebody who's brilliant that can do this kind of work. Why wouldn't you want them on your team? I mean, do you really, does their code come with gender? Is it like, oh, I'm looking at this C++ code, but obviously it was written by somebody who was a female because it's impossible. You can't, it's not that way. So if it doesn't exist in the code, why does it have to exist in the environment? It doesn't matter, in that regard. So it's really important to kind of make sure it's a safe space where people can communicate, share their intellectual ideas, and let their prowess be what allows them to excel in the community and really nothing else. As a matter of fact, we are always looking for diverse speakers. One of our requirements is that we cannot have we have to have a certain percentage of our sessions must be diverse across the board. It's just one of the requirements that we have. And so we spend a lot of time trying to find different diverse speakers. So if you're interested, just saying, it's important to us. It's the only way that we're going to be able to help foster it and grow it. And then on top of it, we also have some different pieces where we have groups that we're getting involved with and putting some of the funds and resources to different communities to help kind of grow all of those different areas. So if you're curious more about it, hop into Discord, go into the D&I committee room, strike up a conversation. This isn't the environment where it's like, oh, I'm going to be afraid to say something. Say something. Get involved, say something, bring it up, because we're not going to get any better unless you voice your ideas.
And to me, it sounds like you really thought through some of the implementation. So just having the diversity maintainer sort of almost out, it sounds like veto, like they can be the final.
Oh, they do have
say.
veto power.
Yeah.
All maintainers have to approve before it can be merged. The GitHub won't actually allow it.
I see.
Yeah.
And then
you can force it through.
Gotcha. But then the other parts too, like scholarships and investing, teaching people earlier, like bringing people up through the ranks. That I know that's hugely important. And then scholarships, helping include more people is a really good way to actually make change, much more so than saying, the lip service, like you mentioned. So it's really cool to hear.
Yeah, we had, even like O3DE Con, we have people, they can apply for them. We had quite a few that were approved, where some of them had, their airfare was paid for, or their tickets were paid for, or, so they could be a part of it. It's the big requirement isn't really anything of your background. It's tell us a story. Tell us why you're passionate about it. Give us something to work with. Like out of the bunch of them, there were like 2 or 3, I think, where they were just like, they wrote almost nothing. And I'm like, little effort, little reward. And I was like, no. I'm like, I'm not interested in somebody who just wants to go for a ride. If you want to be here, tell me why. Be passionate. Passion will get you everywhere. It'll get you mentorship. It'll get you growth. It'll get you everything you want to do. But if you're not, you're going to get what you give. We're a multiplier, not an adder.
That totally makes sense. And as you said, it sounds like the door is open. You want to welcome people into the community and you're ready to support them. So it sounds like the Discord is a great place for people to start and check out the meetings and really get involved.
Yeah.
So I'll ask more about that at the end, just as we wrap up, like how people can get in touch and things like that. But I'm wondering, with your career in games and all of your experience, what you're seeing right now is some of the biggest challenges in game development and how this engine can help address them.
So, I mean, the challenges that we're seeing, well, for one, the biggest challenge being people, resources. That's definitely the big part of it. Sure. Some of the other challenges that you'll see, we have different technologies. Some work great, better than others. Some are more performant, some are less performant. Not everybody in the world is writing it on Unreal and Unity. Some people are rolling their own. And so you'll find out that there is a risk of investment on how much do they have to actually tear down to build up. And so when they can take a look at something that already gives them an example or something they can work from, build from, that becomes a challenge. So if they see something in what was written in open source, by all means, they should take it. That's what's kind of weird in the games industry. Let's face it, games industry, we don't share very well. Okay. And when I had the opportunity to get involved with this and change that, yeah, you can bet on, because I watched it for over 20 years, right? You spend 25 years in an industry, you get to see the patterns. And I just kind of got tired of it. I'm like, you know what? Here's a chance to make a mark in an industry where we could really share and do things like everyone else in the world is doing and doing it well. So I think some of those challenges on things that get rebuilt all the time on game engines that don't need to be rebuilt, and some of the advancements in technologies that they can do, I think being able to kind of get past some of those faster are definitely big areas. And some of the architectural things. I mean, when you get programmers, give me documentation, I'm going to fall asleep. Give me code, I will go crazy. I love being able to take something and build upon it, tinker with it. And then once I start tinkering with it, I get it to do something I want it to do. I'm going to find a project that fit into. It becomes a tool in our tool belt. And I've always said myself, the measure of a good engineer is measured by the breadth of their tools.
That makes sense. One thing you mentioned, I do want to open a potential can of worms. So I know the metaverse and all kinds of digital assets and sharing will require a more modular technology that is shared across many different companies. And one of the biggest criticisms right now is that game companies don't share. How are all of these assets going to be shared in the future? So what do you foresee there? What are you predicting?
Well, so if you look at it right now, you've got like GLTF, FBX, USD. There's a lot of different formats that are out there. Some work better than others in different environments. But part of it is really kind of creating a standard. And then if we back up a little bit to when we had 2G service, okay? Mobile phones did not really show web pages like at all right? So we had this thing called WAP. And WAP basically took a web page and allowed it to kind of shorten and clip things out and make it so that it could work on mobile devices before when we get between 2G and 3G. We're going to have that kind of, when we start talking about metaverse, that kind of layer for a little while we're trying to get things standardized and move into that model. The other part will be where one of the pieces in the engine that's cool is the asset processor, right? It's wonderful and it can be painful at the same time, but its main purpose is to be able to ingest different formats. It can ingest a whole ton of different graphic and mesh formats and output a standardized format or another format. And so somebody could literally take that piece alone and build it as a web service or as an automated service that runs in the cloud and scales and could be doing conversion as a service for assets. So that if I had 1,000 pieces, just run them in, there you go, and it can spit out a standardized format. So there'll be some of that, but I think that's one piece of the equation. The other part of it is that you look, when we're talking about metaverse, okay, you can't really expect people to be pulling down. First of all, it's not all going to be running in the same engine, okay? There has to be more than one engine. If you look at with Epic joined us. And they're on our board and they're involved with us. And the main reason behind that is because it's healthy having more engine in the marketplace. And so instead of trying to, beat each other up, we actually work together. We're building tools that allow us to share assets and some limited script canvas, visual scripting between the two engines. And what that allows it to do is, as it continues to become modular, that will allow people to seamlessly move between the two. So they could be using Unreal or using O3DE engine, and it brings them closer to open source, but allows them to keep their intellectual property like Nanite and their amazing technologies. If we look in the future of metaverse, you have to understand there are a lot of parallels here. Right now, when you load a web page, right, the web page you load today is very different from the web page you loaded 20 years ago. You loaded a web page 20 years ago, HTML, laid out, wasn't very interactive. Today, you got like 10, 15 JavaScript things that get loaded up when you load up that page in the background. And you don't realize there's so much code being loaded into that browser, which is why you want to punch your machine half the time. But there's so much code being loaded because they're modules, okay? And if we think about what it'll be in the metaverse is going to have to be a handful of modules that'll be graphic libraries, loading libraries, shared libraries, interpolation libraries, spatial libraries, scaling libraries. And those libraries are going to have to be kind of like in the same manner. And we have WebAssembly and WebGPU to help us kind of bridge that. But what you can expect is that somebody's going to have an installer for every single engine that has to go on your system to move from experience to experience. Because when we define a metaverse isn't Roblox. A metaverse is getting all of these systems that were not designed to talk to each other to talk to each other. So when I can move from when I go from Roblox to Facebook to Call of Duty to Fortnite to Minecraft, when I'm able to go to different experiences, that's when you're talking about a metaverse, just like we have an internet today. So that's the reason why the role of this is really important, because as we get down the road towards modularity, those standard, table stakes of things that people don't want to rewrite that can use an open source library. Do you really think everybody's rewriting their own OpenSSL library? No, just go use the OpenSSL library. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that in assemblies, where it's super important, because if not, what happens is the metaverse doesn't become the metaverse. It becomes a platform or a series of platforms. It becomes the Facebook platform, the Microsoft platform, and that doesn't allow incumbents to come up, which is what we've been able to do. Think about if we would have left the telcos to determine how much bandwidth you can get from different sites. You remember this came out this was like 10 years ago, I think, or something like that, where they were trying to say, you pay a premium that you can go to different sites. Think of how much more the internet would have sucked today.
Right.
And so this is really important to allow incumbents and indies and people to build these experiences so they can grow and they can challenge big companies, and big companies will have to reinvent themselves. And we'll see this. That's a healthy environment, and that's why it's important.
That sounds awesome. It sounds like a very bright future, and a lot of thought and vision is already going into it. So it's been about a year now since the engine has been out, and I'm wondering how that's gone. What you had as a big takeaway, and if you're able to give us any sneak peeks into the roadmap in the future.
So the cool part about sneak peeks is that there are no real sneak peeks. Everything's public. Literally, you can go into the project board and pull up what's coming up in them, and what they're working on. But when we came out originally, it was rough. It was rough on every edge. You know what I mean? But it was also several millions of lines of code that went into open source that the world could work with. And so, it went from this project that all of a sudden the community started embracing and building tools on to, we got the first review, and it got brutalized, rightfully so. And then in December, we had another release, November, December, and it got brutalized again, and rightfully so. People think, oh man, when you get, aren't you mad when you get like a poor review? I'm like, no, that literally gave us what we need to fix, what needs to be taken care of, what people are concerned about. So each one of those, they made a ton of changes and a ton of fixes. And then when the March release came out, the reviews were like, hey, you should check this out. Something's going on here. And so a lot of time was spent in the beginning. There were a lot of features that were missing that had to be there because it was a truly rewritten engine. A lot of the features made things buggy, crashing, all kinds of issues into December. But then after that, it went into a stability cycle. So it's been in a stability cycle now for about 8 months, where the next release is all about stability with all the features. There's some really new cool stuff, like bummer we couldn't share screens. I had like a whole bunch of cool stuff to show. But some of the terrain and land stuff, where you can actually build islands and seam them together and do all kinds of really cool, neat stuff. And that'll be at the O3DE Con event. But it's grown and matured quite a bit, where it has a rhythm and a flow. We have a lot of contributions. We have different independent groups moving with it. We've got the robotics plugin that's happening now, the digital twin piece that's going on. I'm working with universities on, putting a lot of these pieces together for how students can get the roadmap. So it's in that, I won't say TikTok type style, but, one part stability, features, and you want to kind of keep that moving where but you don't want to break the architecture. So that's really where it's been and where it's going to, kind of keep advancing it. The thing is, the velocity is still incredibly fast. And that's a key piece, because if you look at the growth of what we've been able to do in the first year compared to a lot of other open source projects, it's way far and beyond. You know, where will we be in 10 years? Way farther than anybody would expect any other open source project to be because of that velocity. I see we have a question, by the way.
Yeah. So is this something, I think we touched on it a little bit, but just to clarify, is this a project for C++ developers without game or 3D experience, or do people really need that background to jump in?
They don't. That's the funny thing, because you still have a core runtime system. You still have, you know, standard libraries that have to be POSIX compliant so that it can work across platforms. You have memory subsystems. You have, you know, routines. You have a lot of operations that go along within it that have to be worked on. Then, if you want to get into the 3D space, you can. But you've got a message bus system. You have a language. Gosh, what is the there's a term for it, but basically what it does, it allows you to extend all the APIs and libraries so that not only are they self-discoverable, but they can be connected with other languages. Behavior, was it behavior context? Not behavior context, context something. But what it is, we actually had somebody crazy enough using the context piece of it, and they extended JavaScript into this engine. So, I mean, you literally could bolt in C#, Rust, whatever you want to, just by using the extensibility of it. And these are things people are looking for. You'll come to find out that a lot of this, you don't have to have a 3D background to build, because there's so much into it. The engine itself is completely asynchronous. And if you're wondering, you know, what does that matter? Well, if I go to read something, if I block other threads, that means the CPU's idle, the memory's idle, things are idle, waiting for that thing to happen. When it's asynchronous, your machine can go full blast, full bore, and you can take advantage of all the power in the machine. So everything you do runs asynchronously. So do you need to have that 3D background? No. As a matter of fact, people who are working in that area get to see some really, really cool ways of how that's being solved in a high scalable manner that has nothing to do with 3D. And so one of the pieces that we have is the script canvas. So a lot of people are familiar with blueprints. It's the equivalent of script canvas. That's a module. You literally could take that entire module, rip it out of the engine, and they're doing that now, where they're using it for AI and scientific discovery, where they're using this blueprints or script canvas to build code blocks that have nothing to do with the engine. Literally, you bolt squares together and you can build entire code things without a programmer in almost any environment, because it's its own module.
Wow.
Think about that. So you take your AI and you know what your inputs and your outputs and your modules are. You program them into script canvas as endpoints, and then you never need a programmer. You literally just build the whole thing visually.
It sounds like it's a very democratizing tool set. So maybe like letting more people get into working with these kind of things and creating stuff that may not have otherwise had the opportunity previously.
Well, I mean, the fact is that having something like that was designed for this environment, but when pulled out could be used in any environment that's rich, that's a totally different use case outside of the ordinary. There's nothing to do with 3D. And that's how we want people to use it that way. You know, look, I'd love it if I saw, you know, that used. I mean, we even have like other projects like Godot, right? Godot could literally take that whole entire, you know, whether they believe in visual scripting or not, somebody could take that system, plug it in, we're good.
Right.
It's about sharing. It's not about competition.
Right. And I really like to hear that. It sounds very welcoming. And I'm wondering if anyone else has any questions, because we're getting down to the last questions I've got. So if you have any additional questions for Royal, now's the time to get them in. And we talked about this a little bit. It sounds like Discord's probably one of the best answers. And before we got on the call today or stream on Twitch, we were talking about how you're always in the Discord, you're always available. So what's the best way that people can get in touch with you and your team to learn a little more? If they want to dig in, how can they get started?
Yeah, they can always reach me in Discord. I mean, when you get in the O3D Discord, I'm in the top right corner. You can also reach out on the O3D site. You can inquire. It gives me a HubSpot email. So I mean, there's a lot of ways that people can reach. And just to be clear, this includes students. You know, people who are maybe afraid, like, oh, I'm not sure if I can talk to them. This is no like untouchable thing. If you're trying to get understand a better path or trying to figure out how to maneuver in this field, reach out. It's not going to hurt.
And this engine can be used for game development, but also many other things. And it's available on Windows and Linux and across multiple platforms. I'm wondering if you just want to give the spiel, just let everybody know.
So we have right now the two main packages. We have a Windows package and a Debian package, so you can use it on Linux. You know, native on those platforms. It compiles for Mac, Windows, Linux, Android, iOS, and consoles if you have the appropriate licensing. You know, where you would reach out to those vendors for it. And so there is a Mac build, but it's not officially supported. I think if we had more people that were looking for Mac editor support, they would just simply kind of request it. You'll find out in open source that the louder the voice and the more contributions, the faster it accelerates. So I can tell you that there is full metal support already built in. So the 3D acceleration on Mac is already in the render and the baseline for the RHI and RPI. So, and they did have the Mac editor running. I think there was a screenshot we took last year in October of it running natively on a Mac. So, you know, if people want to go down that road, they can.
That's awesome. We definitely need more games on Macs and Mac development. So that sounds really good. And then we've said it a couple times, but where can people go if they want to contribute? Like you said, anyone can do it, jump right in. Someone's looking to get involved. How should they do that?
If they're looking to get involved, you can go to o3de.org. And there's a place in there I think you can find for contribute. You can go into GitHub, github.com/O3DE. There's actually an area in there. If you go into the O3D project and you go to issues, if you click on labels, there's one in there called Good First Issue. So if you go to Good First Issue and you want to, these are things that were made for the community to be able to learn how to use them. They're very, very simple, small pieces, very bite-sized morsels that anybody could probably do, but it's great for somebody who's just trying to learn or get involved in it. There's all the documentation community. Really, I would say go into Discord, introduce yourself, get involved in some of the different areas, and you know, say, hey, I've got some cycles. I want to work on some stuff. What have you got? And I don't think anybody's going to turn you down. I can tell you that. They're very open. They love and they embrace people that come in there. And if anybody in the community is in Austin or wants to go down, we have the event that I spoke of earlier, O3D Con, which is dedicated for all the things here for Open3D. And there's also a metaverse track that we have there as well. But the other part is to go on YouTube. And there are a lot of videos on YouTube that you can actually do to learn. And if you love books, there's actually an O3DE book by Olex, who's incredibly awesome. And he's in Discord as well, the author, and he's always working on it, where you can learn how to do a bunch of this stuff. So
I don't know if you're looking at that question.
I saw a question pop in.
Yeah,
we know about the technical skills needed for O3DE. How does working with others for developing soft skills? Working with others, you mean how you're? I'm assuming you mean how you work within a community, and with others, and you'll find out that it really comes down to when you're working with others, having your code, talking about it. When you'll find out if you go into GitHub and you do something, you fork it, you start building a change in there, and you commit it, you'll find out that people will give you feedback on your code, and you'll be able to learn and get a lot more experience from them. You build your credibility in the open source community. You'll find out that the best way to grow and gain those soft skills is by following the ideals of a duocracy. And that is that when you are doing things, you are building your own credibility and expertise as somebody who is pushing and driving it forward. And people will come and talk to you. They'll want to learn from you. They'll want to, you'll find out that no matter how experienced you are, talking to other people is what makes you from good to great. And those soft skills are the result of people who are looking for help with projects and different relationships. And you'll find out that that also bleeds over really well in companies and organizations when you go to work there. Hopefully that answered the question.
I hope so. I think so. Just, and what you mentioned about working, someone coming in as a PM, that just organizing that and getting everyone on board, interacting, it's just exposure and experience. So as someone who's looking to hire people, interviews a lot, just putting yourself out there, you get the hang of it eventually.
Yeah.
So
it's working open source is very different from working in a company, because in a company you're getting paid for it. And you might get frustrated with how you're working with somebody. In open source, that person may or may not be getting paid for it. And that person also doesn't have to tolerate if you're having a bad day. So you have to learn how to be a good citizen in open source, or people just simply stop communicating with you, is what happens. And once you get used to some of those soft skills and you bring them into the office, come to find out that people genuinely want to work with you and they want to do more with you. And that contributes to your success.
It sounds like participating could be a huge accelerator in many different ways. So that's really awesome. And I don't see any other questions at the moment. We'll maybe give people a couple more seconds to get something in, but otherwise, are there any upcoming game jams, or besides the October meetup, anything else you want to tell us about?
So we do have, we're working on a game jam that we're looking at doing in November, December timeframe. It's not been announced. We are definitely working on one, and we just want people to build weird things and whatever they can. Here's the thing: people think it's like really, really hard, but I've done a couple game jams where we've like, I worked with the ESA, and we would go in to like a bunch of high school students. They bring in like 40 or 50 11th and 12th, and then first and second year college students. And we would crash course them for 90 minutes on how to use this, and then give them a handful of assets and tell them to go build something. And of those teams, it was great because we came back with like 10 different games in 6 hours that people had built. I mean, these aren't AAA or anything, but some of them, like one of them was really wild. Like they made a really creepy environment and like did all this really cool stuff. So don't let it intimidate you, I guess is what it comes down to. And if you run into a problem, you're not sure what to do, ask. That level of support and what you're doing is really crucial. So the plan here is to have multiple game jams working with different groups, to have multiple events to actually drive, what we're trying to do here. And of course, we'll be at all the game shows, talking with them and working with different partners. Yeah, so that's, it's definitely an exciting time.
Absolutely. And we'll keep our eyes out for that announcement. Let people know more about the conference, maybe do some retweeting and sharing of that information. And if you are able to share the slides with us that you were going to present, I'm super sorry we couldn't get that worked out. Then we can post those two with the links for the talk, and hopefully people can check them out later.
Awesome. Yes, I definitely can.
Cool. That sounds good. Well, I think I don't see another question. So I think that's probably all the time we've got today. I really want to thank you for sharing your vast knowledge with us. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope everybody else did too.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. The last thing I should say is, besides joining the O3DE engine Discord, definitely anyone out there listening and watching, please join the IGDA Seattle Discord, and that way you can learn about all these events, get the information that we have, and we'll pass that along. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody. It was really fun to host this talk, and I hope you'll join us next time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night.